Okay, I'm in Ephesians chapter 2. Ephesians chapter 2, I'm going to spend some time between verses 14 and 16. In the previous message, I was talking about the middle wall of separation. The middle wall of separation in verse 14, this can be described in two different ways. We have in verse 14, "For he himself is our peace, who has made both one and has broken down the middle wall of separation." Okay, and the middle wall of separation was the law. Okay, it was the law in the sense that it was the Mosaic law that God gave to the nation of Israel that defined the commonwealth of Israel, and the Jews were the remaining tribe, effectively, of the commonwealth of Israel. All right, and I was explaining in the previous message how God took away the law, which was a wall between the Jew and the Gentile. He did that through dying for the sins of humanity, as the law demanded death, or demanded obedience or death. Those were the two options, obedience or death. No one would ever obey to the satisfaction that the law required, to the expectations of the law, requirements that the law required. And no one had a life worth giving either. And so our God gave his life on our behalf. And that effectively took down the wall, the wall that separated the Jew and the Gentile. Now, on this basis, people will often make the assumption that what this means is that the Jew will now become like the Gentile. Take away the law and the Jew can be just like the Gentile. But that's not the solution. Okay, it's not the solution at all. Instead, you need to make the Gentile and the Jew into a new person entirely. And this is what I was explaining in the previous message. All right, now let me add something to this. Just because the Gentile did not have the law that God gave through Moses, that didn't mean that they did not have their own ideas about what the law should be, or what would be the standard of good and evil in their lives. Okay, everyone has got their own idea of religious law, even though they don't call it that, or some may very well call it that in their own religious systems that are different from what God defined in the scriptures. There will be a standard of good and evil that will exist. Okay, and everyone has got this, has got this attitude. Everyone has got this religious law in their life. All you have to do is just listen to a person long enough, and eventually they're going to say something that sounds like, "Oh, that's just wrong," or "That's just right." Whenever they do that, they are defining for you and for themselves. They are making a definition of what they believe the law of righteousness should be. Okay, what makes a person right or good as opposed to making a person evil? Everyone has got their own ideas, okay, their own beliefs concerning what is the knowledge of good and evil. And this creates a wall, right, a separation between them and everybody who doesn't agree with them. And it also creates a separation between them and God. Okay, obviously it creates a separation between those and, between themselves and those who don't agree with them. That's obvious, that occurs. But it also creates a separation between them and God because, well, first of all, God doesn't necessarily agree with their definition. All right, with their law that they have established. He doesn't necessarily live in agreement with that. In addition to that, chances are they will have violated their own law in one way or another themselves. Okay, just because they have this righteous, self-righteous attitude and belief system of what is right and wrong and good and evil doesn't mean that they comply with it either. And if you wait long enough, you'll eventually find some examples, I'm sure, of how they violate their own systems of law that they try to impose on other people. My point is that under that basis, they create a wall of separation between themselves and this God that they want to believe in. They're not even going to draw near to their own fictitious God, to their own fantasy of who God is, because they're not going to comply with their own law that they come up with on their own by themselves anyway. All right? And so the solution is not to make a Jew into a Gentile who then, lives by these other religious ideals or ideas or these other religious systems or these other laws, but it is to recognize that not just the Jew is not just the Jew who needs to let go of their law, it is also the Gentile who needs to let go of all of their laws and embrace the reality that God has defined according to the new covenant. In order to do that, they have to recognize the law that God gave to Israel that defines what sin really is, to comply with what is real and to live in what is real and to be able to accept the forgiveness that God has genuinely offered for the sins that God says are sins. Okay, all of that is part of the package deal of, the struggle of the Gentile becoming a child of God. But that's another wall of separation that can exist. Okay, now the wall of separation between God and humanity was another kind of wall, and I mentioned this in the previous message, that was established at the fall of humanity to begin with, when all of this was initiated. Okay, when God created Adam and Eve and he established the garden and he put them in the garden, he gave them one commandment. He said, listen, there is one tree, which is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And that tree is just for God, right? It's just for him. You are not to eat from that tree. Now, Adam and Eve, of course, they believed the satanic lie that if they were to eat from that tree, then they would know what is good and evil, which implies that they can do that which is good and not do that which is evil. And by default, they would be like God. Okay, that was the promise that was made by the devil. That was what they believed. And, and of course, through this decision, they rejected God, because the idea was that God was being dishonest with them. Okay? God knows that if you eat from this, then you can be like him, and he doesn't want you to do that kind of thing. So it was a rejection of God as a person. It was a rejection of the existing relationship that he had defined with them that was not based on the knowledge of good and evil. It was not based on a system of law. And they rejected that. They rejected their God. And so what did he do? He accepted the rejection. Okay? He accepted the rejection, and his spirit that was within them withdrew from within them, separated from them, so they no longer had the Spirit of God dwelling within them, the Holy Spirit, the life of God that was breathed within them when they were created. That's what the Holy Spirit was. So they were now in a new condition. A condition of not having the life of God means that you don't have life. By definition, that means you are dead. Okay? They were dead spiritually. It was a spiritual death that God was referring to when he said that in the day that you eat from this tree, in that day, at that moment, you will absolutely be dead. And that's exactly what happened. It was a spiritual death. They were certainly physically alive, and they continued to live physically for many years, but it was a spiritual death that happened at that moment. Okay? So now you have a problem that needs to be solved. The problem between God and humanity as a whole. Does humanity live by the knowledge of good and evil, by a system of law, or not? When a person finally recognizes their condition of hopelessness, all right, and they recognize that they are not near to God and they have no hope of ever being near to God by their repentance and obedience, or by their system of law that they live by, when that occurs, then you can embrace forgiveness. But a part of this package, all right, this is a package, and a part of this, of embracing forgiveness, also is a recognition that living our lives by the knowledge of good and evil doesn't work. Okay? And if you can't make it that far, you're not going to go much further beyond that. That's a serious matter for a person to be able to grow and mature in a relationship with God. A person may very well be born again by His Spirit. He makes those decisions, I'm sure. But they're not going to be able to really draw near to Him and grow in this relationship with Him until they recognize that the law has to be removed from their lives. Okay? In order for the law to effectively be removed from a person's life, they need to know what to embrace. Okay? To just say, live without law, that's not going to help. All right? They need to know, a person needs to know, well, then how do I now live? What does it mean to live the Christian life? And that's the purpose of discovering and understanding the inheritance in Christ that we have received as a result of His death. Okay, that is a completely different way of life, and that is the direction to go in, which I'm not going to be able to take the time to get into in detail in this message. I can only tell you that that is the direction to go. You don't just let go of the law. You have to also embrace the inheritance and to live with what you have been given by God, and let that be the way that you live your life. You live your life with what you have, whereas before you lived your life hoping to gain something. Okay, that was what your life was about. It was about trying to obtain what you do not have. Now you have, you now live your life with what you have. Okay, that's the direction to go in. Okay, but having said all of that, let me go ahead and go down to verse 16 first. And to talk about verses 14 to 16, Ephesians chapter 2, 14 to verse 16, I'm going to start with verse 16 and work my way back up to 15 and 14. The reason why is because the style of writing that Paul uses is he speaks about the general concepts or the general issues first, and then he develops the specifics. Okay, but in most cases, especially when we're speaking and thinking in English, we're usually going to be thinking about the specifics first and then generalize. All right, and so it's better to go to the specifics in verse 16 and work back up to 15 and 14 from a general point of view after that. In verse 16, he says, "And that he might reconcile them both to God in one body through the cross, thereby putting to death the enmity." Okay, now that might feel a little bit awkward. Let me go back up to verse 14 and I'll come back to that, okay? And read this in order. From verse 14, "For he himself is our peace, who has made both one and has broken down the middle wall of separation." And I've spent a lot of time in verse 14. "Having abolished in his flesh the enmity, that is, the law of commandments contained in ordinances, so as to create in himself one new man from the two, thus making peace." Okay, and I was explaining peace not just between the Jew and the Gentile, but also between himself and God. "And that he might reconcile them both to God in one body through the cross, thereby putting to death the enmity." Let me speak about putting to death the enmity first, and then I'll go back up into reconciliation and such. Okay, putting to death the enmity. What was the enmity, right? What was it? Okay, well, you could say it's sin. Sin needed to be put to death. But we also need to expand that a little bit more and get to the definition of sin, which is the law. And to say that the law itself also needs to be put to death. And I've already said a lot that should, hopefully give you a sense for why it would be necessary to put the law to death. Why it would be necessary to put sin to death. Okay, I'm going to try not to repeat the reasons why we need the law put to death and why we need this, why we need sin put to death, and just work from there. All right, that this is something that God did so that he could save people, all right, and so that a new relationship can be established. All right, but what you will notice when you enter into the Christian world, or as you have probably been a part of it for a significant period of time, what you probably will notice is that great effort is being applied to try and keep the enmity alive. Okay? I'll say it again. You probably will have noticed that great effort is employed. People are going through great effort to try and keep the enmity alive. And you can address this from either the topic of sin or from the topic of the law, right? Either way. In fact, well, let's do both, right? From the topic of sin, have you noticed that great effort is made by the religious people, by the churches that you've had exposure to? A tremendous amount of effort is made in order to try and keep sin alive. Okay? And you'll notice this because they keep talking about it. All right? It's always brought up. It's always there, but it's there in the context of stop doing it. We're going to inform you of what is sin, and we want to encourage you to stop doing it. And we're even gonna get ourselves involved in your life in order to hunt down and find and discover and expose whatever sins you may still have. There is an absolute, all right, an absolute intent and purpose in people trying to keep the subject and the topic and the issues of sin alive. Keep it alive. Keep it going. Keep it real. Keep it a part of your life. Why are people doing that? All right. You have to consider that there are reasons why people are doing this. Okay. A big part of it is because there is a belief that the more that this is pursued, then perhaps sin will be reduced. Okay. Which of course isn't working, right? It gives people more things to think about not doing, and then they get tempted by it even more. You have the natural rebellion of humanity. Okay. And that gives people the inspiration to go do it just because they have this desire to be rebellious. They want to be their own person. They want to be independent and free and not be controlled. Some people relate that way. You have the religious pride that gets manifested, and other sins erupt when a person believes they found a way to not commit that sin. And then, of course, you got the people who commit that sin, certainly feel quite guilty and ashamed over that, and now they're going to be further separated from God because, of course, he rejects them. And in order to deal with all the religious pressure that they're under, what do? Well, they go and engage in more sin in order to get a break from all the religious pressure that they're under because of the failure of their previous sins. This is what goes on. Okay, so to keep sin alive is not helping anybody. It's increasing the problem. Okay, those are some examples of ways of how the problem is being increased. Trying to keep sin alive, well, it works. Okay, you keep it alive and you make it grow. You make it more, you make it worse. All right, now what is what is the reason behind this? It is they're hoping that they will reduce it, but by default they increase it. Okay, but this is not the only thing that's going on. You may notice that there is a solution that is often presented for sin. There's a solution. And what is that? It's some kind of sacrificial system. Okay? And you even have congregations who have what they declare to be an altar, where you go to the altar. And of course, you're not going to go and bring your pets and set them on fire. You're not going to do that. That would be too obvious that you would be trying to live by the Mosaic law. We don't want to make it obvious that that's kind of what it is. Okay, so don't set your pets on fire. Instead, just go down there and apologize. Go to the altar and confess your sin. Apologize to God. Say you're not going to do it ever again, and ask for forgiveness, and then you're good to go. All right, until you of course you do it again anyway. So there's a new sacrificial system that gets established to try and resolve the sin in people's lives. Now, fundamentally, what this does is this rejects the forgiveness that God has already given. Okay, did he die for past, present, and future sins? Or did he just die for past sins? Obviously not present, definitely not future. Was the sin issue resolved or was it not? That's the question that needs to be answered. Is the sin issue over or is it not over? And in this kind of mechanism or in this kind of belief system, it is a way of rejecting the forgiveness that God has already provided. Okay? So the sacrificial system might certainly make people feel good because they are doing something and they are apologizing and they are confessing and they're asking for forgiveness. It'll make people feel good. But how do you think it makes God feel when he is asked to do something that he has already done? And in fact, what was required was his death in order to accomplish it. And they're suggesting that just because they apologize and they say they're sorry, that somehow that's better maybe, or at least equitable to what he already did. He did not die on the cross to invoke a new sacrificial system like this. But this is what people have created and what they want. And there probably are a lot of people who do this out of great sincerity. And of course, they are sincerely wrong. Okay? But then there are other people who do this and don't care whether it is sincere or whether it is right or wrong. They don't care. The only reason why they have or why they are a part of or why they have established or why they lead these sacrificial systems is because they get paid to do it. All right? There is a financial incentive to provide a sacrificial system, to provide for the decorated facility and of course the altar, and the staff and the people who will assist you in performing these sacrificial things. All right? There is a financial incentive to keep this going. A financial incentive to keep sin alive. There's money in it. Keep sin alive because there's money in it, because the people who are getting paid to keep sin alive. They keep it alive so that you have to have their leadership. You have to have their supervision. You have to be under the authority. You have to have their authority in your life. You have to be under the authority of a pastor, of a leader, elder, of somebody, right? They get paid for this. Okay, and you got to have a place to go and repent and obey and ask for forgiveness. You got to have this place. You got to pay for the facility. You got to pay for the for the furniture. The altar, the furniture. You got to pay for that, and you got to pay for the cleaning service. Comes in behind and cleans everything up. I mean, this is what it's an industry. Okay? It's an industry, it's a business, it's a way of making money. Okay? That's what it is for a lot of people. They don't care about the truth. And you might notice, some of you probably have noticed this as you have spoken with some of these people who run these decorated facilities. And look, if you've got a decorated facility, I don't want to say there's anything bad about it. I'm saying it that way to exaggerate the point. I've had decorated facilities. If I have another one in the future, I will enjoy it. By all means, enjoy it. Okay, but when people are doing these things to support things that are not true, then there's dysfunction going on. All right. But this is, you probably noticed that you go and you talk with people who are the leadership of these places, and you don't get anywhere. All right. I mean, if you notice that you don't get anywhere. Okay, it's either because they genuinely deny the truth, they just don't believe it. Okay, and you will find some who are like that, but you will also find others who just don't really even care. Okay, they don't. They pretend that they care, but they don't. For them, it's a job. It's a way of making money, right? And if they were to embrace and believe and respond to the truth that you're communicating, they're going to lose their job. The people in that congregation, they're just going to hire somebody else to provide them with the same services. It's not really the leadership. It's the people who support them. It's the people who pay them to do this. Okay, so don't blame the leadership or go after them because they're the easiest to talk to, because they supposedly in their position, they're supposed to listen to you. They're supposed to have conversations with you. It's not them. It's the people who are paying them to do that, who need their beliefs adjusted. Okay? I mean, if people recognize that the sin issue was over, they would not go to listen to some person tell them that it's not over. They wouldn't go there so that somebody would tell them that sin is still alive. When God put it to death, but these people are telling them that sin is still alive and that the law is still alive. If the people believed the truth concerning this, they wouldn't show up the next Sunday morning. And then what's going to happen if the leadership shows up, right? Because it's their job. They show up for their employment, and the congregation doesn't show. All right? Because they don't want to be told that the enmity is still alive. What if they don't show? What do you got now? Right? It won't be very long before that decorated facility, is no longer operating. Okay? And the leadership there are going to have to find work elsewhere. They're going to have to find a new way to get paid, to pay their bills and to pay for their lifestyle. It's the people. Okay, it really is the people. It's not the leaders, it's the people. And so if you want to, contribute to the work of God with regards to exposing and realizing and for people to live by the truth, you have to go to the people. If you think you're going to fix the leader and that's going to work. I've seen this happen. The leader starts telling the truth and they fire him, and they hire somebody else who are going to continue the lie. That happens, that's how it goes. All right. So keeping enmity alive is a serious problem. The same thing is with regards to the law. Okay. In verse 16, putting to death the enmity. It was the law that was put to death. Remember that the separation between God and humanity was something that happened when Adam and Eve decided to reject God, say that he was lying to them, and pursue the life of the knowledge of good and evil, thinking that if they only knew what was right and wrong, they could do that which is right, not do that which is wrong, and they could be like God. If they only knew the right law. Okay? That's what it means. If we would only have the right law, if we only had the right commandments, if we only knew what the commandments of God would be, then we could be like him. We could be good. Okay, and this is a wall of separation between God and his creation, because he did not create us to function that way. He created us to function on the basis of the personal, individual relationship between him and his creation. And there is an opportunity for this to begin again when you are born again by the Holy Spirit of God, and he dwells within you, and he gives to you the inheritance in Christ, which really is himself, who meets the deepest needs of your heart and of your being, and who will guide you and lead you as you live your life on a daily basis. That's a whole different kind of personal relationship. And it is the system of law. It is the way that we live according to the knowledge of good and evil that separates us from our God. It is the enmity that needed to be put to death. All right? And when he died, he fulfilled the demand of the law of obedience or death. He took the death option. When he died, he killed the law. He put the law to death by fulfilling it. And instead, what do people keep trying to do? They keep trying to keep the law alive. Let's resurrect the law. Instead of resurrecting people, we're going to resurrect the law. And you will hear this coming from just about everybody. Even people who say that they're grace teachers, the grace, they're teaching grace, they believe in grace. Well, maybe in a few small little areas that could be recognized, but the rest of what they teach is the law. Okay? They keep the law alive. That's the end of verse 16. Going back up a little bit. And that he might reconcile them both to God in one body through the cross. Okay, so it was through the cross, through forgiveness. Okay, through forgiveness, he put the law to death. He put sin to death. He reconciled both the Jew and the Gentile to himself, reconciled them to himself by resolving the problem of sin, by bringing it to an end, by putting it to death. It was reconciliation between him and God. It was also the opportunity to have reconciliation between the Jew and the Gentile, because these arguments and discussions about good and evil and everything should be put to death. There is a new life in Christ Jesus. He reconciled everyone to himself, both Jew and Gentile, in one body. Now, this one body can be seen in two different ways. First of all, by the body of Christ, all right, that one body, he put to death sin. He put to death law. He put to death religion. He put it all to death through that one body, the body of Christ. The Jew and the Gentile also become one body. And so from the other perspective, through becoming one body, this is also accomplished, so that there can be peace between people and peace between the people and their God. Now, just because they are reconciled does not mean automatically that they are saved. Reconciliation is the transition from death to life, but it is not salvation. Everyone has been reconciled to God by the death of his Son. Everyone. The death of his Son, reconciliation has been accomplished. We owed God a debt we could not pay. He paid a debt on our behalf that we could not pay. The debt has been resolved. There is now reconciliation between God and everyone in humanity. But if you want to be saved, that's something else. That's accomplished when you are born again and made into a new creation in Christ Jesus through the indwelling presence of the Holy Spirit. And when the Holy Spirit dwells within you, and the sin issue has been completely resolved, there will be no sin that you can ever commit that would cause the Holy Spirit to depart from within you as it did with Adam and Eve. All right, let me say that again. When you are born again by the Spirit of God, and you understand that the sin issue has been completely resolved, you will understand that God resolved the sin issue completely, so that there would be no sin that would cause His Spirit to depart from within you ever again like it did with Adam and Eve. You will never be spiritually dead ever again. The life that you have is by definition an eternal life. You've been made into a child of God eternally. You are now an eternal being. You have eternal life right now, and when you physically die, you will still be alive spiritually, and you will have a place among the living in the kingdom of heaven, among those who also are spiritually alive. And if you're not, then you go to the place where dead people go, all right, which is the place where you will eventually be forgotten, and you will certainly feel quite uncomfortable while you are there. Okay? That is reconciliation. Reconciliation is not salvation. It is what makes salvation possible. Consider Romans chapter 5, verse 10. Romans chapter 5, verse 10, how much more, having been reconciled by the death of his Son, you shall be saved by his life. Okay, that's Romans chapter 5, verse 10. A very good verse to understand that much better. Okay, going back up into verse 15, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, that is the law of commandments contained in ordinances. All right, you can see this now. The enmity is not just the sin, it is also the law. All right, the law itself is the enmity. He has abolished it in his flesh. In his flesh, he has resolved the issue. He has abolished the law. He's taken the law away. He has put the law to death by his flesh when he died on the cross. From his point of view, that is the new reality. Okay? That's what God lives in. That's how he functions. That's how he relates to us. We may try to relate to him differently, but he's just not a part of that. You know, that's just something we do in our own fantasies. From his perspective, the law has been abolished. Not just the Mosaic law, but all ways that people try to be like him through the knowledge of good and evil. All of that, from his point of view, is done. There is a new way of life that he has made available for us, that he functions in. Again, in verse 15, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, that is the law of commandments contained in ordinances, so as to create in himself one new man from the two. All right, he did that. He put the law to death. He put sin to death so that he can make a new man, right? A new person. That's what salvation is, being made into a new person, right? So that now there can be a new way of life of living in peace between each other and between us and our God. Thus making peace. Okay? So with all that I said, I think you can now appreciate verse 15. Going back to verse 14, for he himself is our peace. Why? Because he's the one who did all of this for us. It's not about what we may do or not do for God. It is about what he has done for us. Okay? Religion is all about what you're going to do or not do for God. What the new covenant is about what he has done for us. He himself is our peace, who has made both one and has broken down the middle wall of separation. Okay, I'm going to pause there. That was a lot, I know. For those of you who are using this for your small groups, I have a question that you might use in order to facilitate some conversation. How have you seen people keep the enmity alive? All right, from verse 16. How have you seen people try to keep the enmity alive that God has put to death? And I'll continue in the next message. Thanks.